There are moments in life when we wonder why certain patterns keep showing up for us. We ask ourselves why we feel like we are walking in circles, ending up in the same emotional place, even though the faces and situations may change. For empaths, this is often an experience that feels both familiar and frustrating. Their deep desire to connect, to understand, and to help others can quietly draw them into a repeating cycle. It is not something they choose consciously. It is something that happens gradually, step by step, until they realize they are caught in a loop that feels harder to escape each time. Chapter 1. The empath's beginning point. Every cycle has a beginning, and for empaths, it rarely starts with conflict or difficulty. It begins in a place of pure intention, a place where their natural way of being feels like both a gift and a responsibility. Empaths notice things that others often overlook. They catch the small sigh someone tries to hide. They see the flicker of sadness behind a smile. They feel the tension in a room even when no one has spoken a word. This sensitivity becomes the compass that guides their actions. And most of the time, it leads them straight into giving, supporting, and caring. At the start, there is so much light in this way of living. Empaths step into situations with open hearts, believing that their presence can make things better, and often it does. A comforting word, a patient ear, or a willingness to simply sit with someone who is struggling can create real moments of relief. For the empath, this is fulfilling. They see the change their kindness brings, and it confirms something they've always believed, that compassion has power. But in this beautiful beginning lies the seed of a repeating cycle. The empath's instinct is to give without measuring. They assume that offering their time, energy, and attention will naturally invite balance, that kindness will return in some form. They believe that their openness will encourage openness in others, and that their steady presence will inspire the same in return. This hope is not foolish. It is rooted in a deep trust in human connection, but it is also where the cycle quietly takes shape. Because what often happens is that the empath overlooks the first signs of imbalance. They may notice when someone consistently takes more than they give back, but they brush it aside. They may feel the strain of always being the one to hold space, but they tell themselves it is temporary. They may recognize that their own needs are slipping further down the list, but they convince themselves that it is worth it because the other person needs more in that moment. This willingness to ignore their own discomfort is not weakness. It is loyalty. It is devotion. It is the heart of what makes them who they are. Yet over time, this beginning point becomes a quiet setup for struggle. By believing that their effort alone can create harmony, empaths unintentionally place themselves in a position where they carry more than their share. They try to maintain balance by giving even more, not realizing that the scale is tipping further each time. It is not that they are blind to this imbalance. It is that they believe it can be corrected if they just try harder. Think about how natural this feels for them. Imagine someone who always notices when a glass is half empty, and their first instinct is to fill it. That is the empath's way of being. They see what is missing and rush to provide it, often without pausing to ask if they should, or if it is sustainable, or if their own well is running dry. This is the beginning point of the cycle, and it is where their greatest strength and greatest vulnerability meet. The truth is, empaths are not wrong to begin this way. Their ability to give, to understand, and to be present is one of the most valuable gifts they carry. But when that gift is not met with balance, when their kindness is not returned in even the smallest ways, the cycle begins to tighten around them. They may not see it at first because their focus is outward. They are thinking of others, not themselves, but the pattern has already begun. Understanding this starting point is not about blaming empaths for being too kind. It is about recognizing the quiet shift that happens when giving is not balanced with receiving. It is about seeing how natural it feels to step into that role and how difficult it can be to step out once the cycle has begun. Most importantly, it is about bringing awareness to the moment where the loop first takes shape so that change can begin before exhaustion sets in. Chapter 2. The Emotional Pull. For an empath, emotions are not just observed, they are absorbed. They do not simply notice that someone is upset. They feel that upset within themselves. The sadness of another settles into their own chest. The tension in someone else's voice becomes tension in their own body. The worry in another's eyes lingers in their own thoughts long after the moment has passed. This is the emotional pull. It is what makes them so attuned to others, but it is also what makes stepping away so difficult. Imagine being in a crowded room where everyone is speaking at once. For most people, the noise blurs together into background sound. For an empath, it is as though every voice cuts through clearly. Every emotion has a tone, a weight, a rhythm, and they hear them all at once. They cannot shut it off. They cannot selectively tune in to only what feels manageable. Instead, they carry it, often without realizing just how much. This pull keeps them in situations longer than they should be. It tells them that walking away is the same as abandoning someone. It whispers that if they can feel another's pain so strongly, then surely they must be the one to help relieve it. It convinces them that silence in the face of suffering is cruelty. And so they speak up, they reach out, they lean in, even when they are running on empty themselves. What makes the emotional pull so complicated is that it's not always wrong. Many times, empaths do provide real comfort. Their presence does make a difference. Their willingness to step in does ease the weight someone else is carrying. But when this happens repeatedly without balance, the pull becomes less of a gift and more of a trap. It is no longer a choice they're making freely. It becomes a responsibility they cannot escape, a demand they feel obligated to meet. And this obligation often comes at a quiet cost. Empaths may find themselves drained, restless, or even resentful, though they rarely admit it. They might struggle to fall asleep because they are replaying the emotions of the day, emotions that were never truly their own. They may feel heavy in moments that should be light because they are holding not just their own feelings, but the feelings of many. And still, the pull keeps them tethered. This is why so many empaths describe the experience of being both deeply connected and deeply tired. They cannot stop caring, even when caring begins to hurt. They cannot turn off their awareness, even when awareness becomes overwhelming. They cannot ignore what they feel, even when it leaves them feeling emptied out. The emotional pull is both their strength and their burden, the thread that makes them who they are, but also keeps them tied to patterns that wear them down. The hardest part about this pull is how natural it feels. To an empath, it does not feel like an external pressure or a forced obligation. It feels like truth. It feels like the most natural response to the world around them. If someone is in pain, they feel it too. And what could be more instinctive than trying to help? It does not occur to them, at least not at first, that they are carrying more than they should, or that their sense of responsibility may be far greater than what is actually theirs to hold. Chapter 3. The Cost of Giving Too Much. Every cycle has its consequences, and for empaths, this is where the toll begins to show. The cost of giving too much is rarely immediate. It does not arrive as one dramatic breaking point, but instead as a slow erosion, a steady wearing away of energy, joy, and peace of mind. Empaths often do not even notice it happening until they realize one day that they feel heavier than they used to, more tired than they should be, and strangely disconnected from themselves. The cost begins with energy. When you're constantly tuned into the emotions of others, it is like running an engine without ever stopping to refuel. At first, it may not seem so noticeable. You offer comfort. You lend an ear. You step into someone else's storm and hold their hand through it. And it feels meaningful, even fulfilling. But over time, when the giving is constant and the restoring is absent, the body begins to protest. Fatigue creeps in. Concentration wavers. Even simple tasks start to feel heavier than they should. Then comes the emotional weight. Carrying the feelings of others is not like carrying physical objects that you can eventually set down. Emotions linger. They seep in quietly and stay, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. An empath might notice themselves still thinking about a conversation long after it has ended. They may feel sad or anxious without realizing that the sadness or anxiety did not originate with them. And when this happens often enough, they can begin to lose touch with what they truly feel versus what they have absorbed. This blending of emotions takes a quiet toll on identity. When you are so deeply immersed in the experiences of others, it becomes harder to hear your own inner voice. What do you need? What do you want? What matters to you? These questions become blurry because the noise of everyone else's feelings has grown so loud. And when your own needs are consistently pushed aside, there comes a point where you may forget how to even recognize them. Another cost is in boundaries. Empaths often find that the more they give, the more they are expected to give. People become accustomed to their availability, to their listening ear, to their steady presence. And though the empath may not resent this at first, over time, it can begin to feel like an unspoken obligation, as though they are not allowed to say no. Saying yes becomes easier than the discomfort of disappointing others. But every yes that overrides their own limits deepens the exhaustion. And then there is the quiet resentment that empaths rarely want to admit. On the surface, they may still smile, still comfort, still give, but deep inside, they may feel frustrated or unseen. They may long for someone to notice that they too are tired, that they too have needs. This inner conflict creates guilt. They feel guilty for resenting the very people they care about, guilty for even wishing for space or rest. And so, they push those feelings down and keep giving, even as it hurts them. Over time, this cycle of giving too much can lead to burnout. Burnout for an empath is not just physical tiredness, though that is certainly part of it. It is a kind of emotional emptiness, a feeling that they have poured out so much of themselves that nothing remains. They may feel numb, unable to access the deep compassion that once came so easily. They may withdraw not because they want to, but because they simply cannot bear to feel anymore. And this withdrawal can feel deeply confusing, almost like a betrayal of their own nature. But perhaps the deepest cost is this. Giving too much often leaves empaths feeling unseen in return. They are the ones who listen, but who listens to them? They are the ones who comfort, but who comforts them? They are the ones who notice, but who notices when they are struggling? The quiet reality is that when you give without pause, without boundaries, people often stop looking closely at you. They assume you are fine because you have always been fine. They assume you do not need because you have always given. And this invisibility cuts deeply, leaving empaths feeling not only exhausted, but also profoundly alone. Chapter 4. Why the cycle repeats. When an empath reaches the point of exhaustion, the cost of giving too much becomes impossible to ignore. Yet, for many, the cycle does not end there. Somehow, even after the toll has been taken, the pattern begins again. It is not a conscious choice most of the time. It is not a matter of willpower. It is a deep habit shaped by years of living this way, a pattern built into the way they respond to the world. One reason the cycle repeats is that for many empaths, giving has become a form of identity. It is not just something they do. It is who they are. They see themselves as the listener, the helper, the steady presence in the storms of life. This identity feels familiar, even comforting, even when it comes with a cost. And when they try to stop giving in the same way, a strange unease can arise. They may feel guilty, as though they are abandoning their own nature. They may feel restless, as though something inside them is missing. This deep connection to the act of giving makes it difficult to change. Another reason is the pull of empathy itself. Empaths are wired to notice the feelings of others. Even when they are depleted, that awareness does not switch off. They can still feel when someone is struggling, still feel the pull to step in. This awareness can be exhausting, but it is also deeply ingrained. It becomes a reflex. When they sense someone's pain, their first instinct is to help. Breaking that instinct requires conscious awareness and deliberate practice, something that often takes years to develop. There is also the comfort of familiarity. Even though the cycle is painful, it is known. It is a familiar way of relating to the world. Stepping out of it feels unfamiliar, uncertain. To stop giving in the same way can feel like stepping into a void, a place without the defined roles and routines that have shaped their sense of self for so long. The fear of that uncertainty can keep them locked in the cycle, even when they recognize the cost. Another part of why the cycle repeats is what happens after the burnout. In that space of exhaustion, the empath often goes quiet. They pull back. They retreat. But in those moments of withdrawal, there is often a subtle longing, a longing to be needed again. They may tell themselves they need rest, but underneath that is a deeper pull to re-engage. And when they return to giving, they do so without having fully addressed the deeper patterns that led to exhaustion in the first place. Without that inner work, the cycle simply begins anew. There is also the way the world responds to empaths. People quickly adapt to the way empaths show up. They come to expect it. They depend on it. And in that dynamic, boundaries become even harder to enforce. Even when an empath tries to step back, they may find themselves drawn back in through subtle pressures, emotional appeals, or even unspoken expectations. The cycle becomes not just a personal habit, but a dynamic reinforced by those around them. Perhaps most powerfully, the cycle repeats because of the meaning empaths attach to giving. They see it as a way of making the world better. They see it as their contribution. Even when they feel depleted, the idea that they can make a difference keeps them returning to the cycle. This is not weakness. It is compassion. But without balance, compassion can transform into self-sacrifice that becomes self-erasure. And that is the hidden trap, the place where empathy becomes exhaustion rather than nourishment. Breaking this cycle requires more than just willpower. It requires self-awareness, a willingness to examine old patterns without judgment, and the courage to redefine what giving means. For many empaths, the first step is noticing when the cycle is happening. The next step is asking the hard questions. Why do I feel compelled to give in this way? Where do my boundaries end and others begin? What does self-care look like for me? And crucially, how do I give in a way that protects my own well-being while still offering care to others? The cycle repeats because it has become unconscious. It repeats because empathy, by its nature, resists boundaries unless they are consciously chosen. It repeats because giving has become intertwined with identity and worth. And it repeats because breaking free requires a kind of bravery that feels unfamiliar to the empath, but it can be broken. It begins with awareness, with intention, and with the willingness to rewrite the way they show up in the world. Chapter 5. How to begin breaking the cycle. Breaking the cycle is not a single moment of decision. It isn't something that happens instantly. It is a process, often gradual, that begins with awareness and grows into conscious change. For an empath, this process is deeply personal because it requires rewriting years of patterns, habits, and beliefs that have shaped the way they give and the way they live. The first step is noticing. Noticing when the cycle is happening. Noticing when giving feels automatic rather than intentional. Noticing when the act of giving leaves them depleted rather than nourished. This awareness is not a one-time realization. It is an ongoing practice. It requires slowing down enough to ask, in the quiet moments, why they are choosing to give and what it costs them in the process. The second step is learning to define boundaries. Boundaries are not walls built to shut others out. They're lines drawn to protect one's own well-being while still allowing compassion to flow. For empaths, boundaries are an act of self-respect. They might start small, saying no to one request, taking one afternoon for themselves, pausing before answering. Over time, boundaries become a habit that strengthens their ability to give without losing themselves. The third step is shifting the meaning of giving. Giving does not have to mean self-sacrifice. Giving can mean presence without depletion. It can mean offering care without losing sight of one's own needs. It can mean choosing where to invest emotional energy so that it is sustainable. This shift often requires deep reflection because for many empaths, giving is tied to identity. Letting go of the old belief that giving everything is the only way to care is part of the journey. The fourth step is cultivating self-compassion. Breaking the cycle is not about perfection. It is about kindness toward oneself in the midst of change. Empaths may find themselves slipping back into old patterns. That does not mean failure. It means the work is ongoing. Self-compassion turns each step, even the missteps, into part of the process rather than proof of defeat. The fifth step is finding supportive structures. This might be a circle of friends who respect boundaries, a therapist who helps navigate emotional habits, or a daily practice that reinforces self-care. Support transforms change from a lonely struggle into a sustainable path forward. For an empath, it is a reminder that they do not have to carry the burden alone. Ultimately, breaking the cycle is about reclaiming choice. It is about moving from a place of unconscious reaction into conscious decision-making. It is about creating a new rhythm of giving, one that allows the empath to remain present without erasing themselves. It is about building a life where compassion does not come at the cost of exhaustion and where giving becomes a source of joy rather than a cycle of depletion.